Chapter 14. Meeting a Shark. Awe! Wiki wiki! Kiabu screamed from the porch of the house. Nancy and the others did not know what he meant, but instinctively they turned in the direction he was facing. Nancy was not a moment too soon. The heavy tongs were coming straight at her. Like a flash, she leaped aside just as the tongs buried themselves in a nearby bush. "Mercy!" Bess exclaimed, clutching her heart. George, who had seen the man near the fire, called out, "There goes the fellow who threw them!" In an instant, she was dashing across the grass after him. Nancy and Bess followed. The fleeing man dodged in and out among the trees and shrubbery until he reached the entrance to Kaluakua. By the time the girls arrived at the spot, he was a good distance down the road. A small black car which had been parked in the bushes picked him up and sped off. The angry girls stood still, staring after it. The automobile was too far away for them to read the license plate. "One of the Scorps, I'll bet." George found her voice. "Thank goodness Kiabu saw him and warned you, Nancy." "Yes," Bess added. "Why, Nancy, you might have been killed by those heavy tongs." Nancy was silent. She was a bit shaken by the experience and was puzzled as to who the man might be. He was of medium height and had thinning dark hair. "I wonder if he's Jim O'Keefe, alias Tim O'Malley," she mused. The girls returned to the picnic spot to find Hannah and Kiabu extremely upset. Nancy tried to soothe them, while George asked what the caretaker had called out. "Awe" means alas, "woe is me," and "wiki wiki," you were to hurry. "Oh, I am so glad you did." "Thank you for the warning, Kiabu," Nancy said solemnly, then added that she was going to report the matter to the police at once. Sergeant Hawk was greatly concerned upon learning what had happened. He did not mention sending anyone to guard the place, however, and Nancy did not bring up the subject. The detectives seemed to be in a hurry to report the matter and try to have the getaway car apprehended. Soon after Nancy returned to the garden, the three boys arrived. All were wearing very gay aloha shirts, which they said they had purchased in the city after delivering the receipt to Mr. Dutton. "These shirts are in honor of the luau," Dave announced. "I suppose we should be wearing muumuus or hula costumes," Nancy reflected aloud. Hannah smiled. "I have a surprise for you girls," she said. "Come upstairs." Nancy and her chums followed Hannah Gruen to the first floor. There she handed each of the girls a muumuu, a white one for Nancy, a blue for Bess, and a pale green for George. "How lovely," Nancy said. "Where did these come from?" "Emma sent them over," the housekeeper revealed. "She thought you might want to wear them tonight." "How very sweet of her," said Bess. The girls put on the muumuus and went to thank Emma. Then they joined the boys and told them about the vicious tongs thrower. "I'm going to stick around after this so that I can take care of you," Ned declared, and Nancy smiled appreciatively. A short time later, Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong and their Polynesian maid arrived with the food for the Hawaiian feast and leis for the mainlanders. "May we help with the luau?" Nancy asked. "Yes," she said. "I think you girls would enjoy setting the table." But first, Mr. Armstrong spoke up. "I think our guests should watch the preparation of the pig." Kiabu produced a huge piece of chicken wire, which was then covered with banana leaves. The pig was laid on them. Next, he picked up one of the hot lava stones with the tongs and placed it inside the animal. Then sweet potatoes and pieces of fish, which had been wrapped in tea leaves, were placed round the pig. Slowly, the wire tray, with its luscious load, was lowered into the pit lined with the hot lava rocks. More banana leaves were spread over it, then large wet sacks. Finally, dirt was heaped on the top. "This is called the imu, or oven," Mrs. Armstrong explained. The pig cooked in the imu is called pua kalua, and will be left for 4 hours to steam. While waiting for the food to cook, the young people told Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong about the recent mysterious happenings. Next, they took them on a tour of the house and showed them the table where the valuable old statuettes had been found. They all did some further searching, but nothing came of it. "Let's gather flowers for the luau now," Mrs. Armstrong suggested. She and the girls walked round the extensive grounds, gathering red, orange, pink, yellow, and purple hibiscus flowers. Next, long tapa mats were brought from the Armstrong car and spread on the ground, not far from the roasting pig. Their hostess had also brought a basket of tea leaves, and she now sprinkled them on the mats. Among these, the girls dropped the hibiscus blossoms. Presently, Emma appeared with luscious-looking pineapples and bananas, which were interspersed with the flowers. "I never saw a prettier table decoration," Bess murmured. At each place, the Armstrongs set a coconut shell filled with poi. Bess gazed at the sticky, paste-like porridge, which she was told was made from the root of the taro plant, and wondered if she dared to eat it. Mr. Armstrong was amused. "Poi is rather flavorless, but you should at least taste it," he urged. Meanwhile, the Armstrongs' maid was busy in the kitchen, grinding coconut and pounding squid. This fish would be roasted brown with sea salt and served with crushed kukui nuts. Emma was filling coconut shell dishes with salmon and onion and tomatoes. Dessert, she said, would be white squares of delicious coconut pudding. By the time the pig was ready to eat, dusk had fallen. Mr. Armstrong stuck several kukui nut torches into the ground and lit them. As the young people gathered round the table with the others, Mrs. Armstrong smiled broadly. "You really look like Hawaiians," she said. "Now, everyone find his place, please." Her guests discovered that place cards had been set among the flowers and leaves. "Why, our names are in Hawaiian!" Bess exclaimed. "Oh dear, how can I ever find mine?" Nancy was the first to discover hers. She declared it was not too hard to figure out. "Anne is a little like my American name," she said, smiling. Hannah was next to find her name. It was Anna Palani. "I presume that stands for Hannah Francis," she said, turning to Mrs. Armstrong. "I wondered why you asked me earlier what my middle name was." The other young people found it impossible to figure out their cards. Finally, their hostess led them one by one to their places. Bess's Hawaiian name was Alikapeka. George's was Keoki. "Yours, Ned," said Mrs. Armstrong, "is Eluani." Eluani was glad to be seated next to Nancy. Bert, called Topaka, was next to George, and Kawiki, meaning Dave, was placed next to his date, Bess. "Oh, this is such fun!" Nancy exclaimed. To herself, she added, "And I hope nothing happens tonight to mar this beautiful party." Everyone seated himself on the ground at the luau table, and Mr. Armstrong proudly carried the crisply browned steamed pig to the table on a wooden platter. "Kiabu was going to do this," he said, "but he has elected himself a guard of the grounds tonight." The feast was pronounced by everyone to be most delicious and filling. While the group was eating dessert, they suddenly heard the soft strains of a guitar. Looking up, they saw a man in a gay yellow and brown satin suit walking towards them. 4 hula dancers followed him. "A little surprise we planned for you," Mrs. Armstrong told her guests. "How absolutely divine!" Bess burst out. The guitarist bowed and smiled, then began to sing. The 4 dancers started to sway in time to the music, moving a few steps to left and right, and gracefully raising their arms. "This is a dance welcoming you to the islands," Mrs. Armstrong told the mainlanders. All too soon the party ended, with the mainlanders declaring that they had never had a more festive meal nor a more enjoyable evening. "And so romantic," Bess declared dreamily, "Oh, I just love this place." Nancy was happy to hear her chum apparently had forgotten her fears about dangerous happenings at Kaluakua. Before going to bed, she and Ned took a stroll round the grounds and spoke to Keabu. The caretaker insisted that he was going to stay up all night to patrol the estate. "How about me relieving you?" Ned offered, but Keabu refused. At breakfast the next morning, the caretaker reported that there had been no disturbance during the night, and he hoped that all intruders had now been discouraged. "Anne, are you ready to do some skin diving?" Ned asked an hour later, his eyes twinkling. "Elueni awaits you." Chuckling, Nancy went upstairs, put on her bathing suit, then joined Ned on the beach. After he had adjusted a transparent helmet over her head and strapped an oxygen tank on her back, Nancy slipped her feet into flippers. Then Ned donned his equipment, and the two walked into the surf. Upon reaching deeper water, they both swam downwards. "How fascinating this is," Nancy said to herself, as myriads of small fish of various colors swam past her. The couple presently came to a cave and paused to watch a small octopus-type creature waving its tentacles about the opening. Nancy was so intent on its maneuvers to collect food by reaching out at passing small prey that she did not notice a very large fish swimming towards her. As she turned to swim off, she was struck with horror. The huge fish, its jaws wide open, was only a few feet away. "A man-eating shark," she thought. Ned, who had become aware of the shark at almost the same moment, gave Nancy a tremendous push upwards. Then he followed her. The two twisted and turned to get out of danger, diving and rising until they eluded the shark and came to the surface. They raced towards shore, constantly looking back over their shoulders to see if they were being followed. Exhausted and their hearts pounding, the two finally reached the beach. As they dropped down, panting and telling each other what a narrow escape they had had, Keabu came walking towards them. A short distance behind him were Bert, George, Bess, and Dave. When they had all gathered around, Nancy and Ned told them about their harrowing experience. Keabu, all the while, was looking off over the water. "I do not wish to take away anything from your bravery, but in the waters of the Hawaiian Islands there are no man-eating sharks. They are all harmless." "Boy, do I feel silly," Ned exclaimed. "Well, live and learn." Keabu said with a twinkle in his eyes, "Don't you remember? Kahuapau, the queen of the sharks, keeps the man-eaters away." George now spoke up. "There may not be any man-eating sharks round here, but there are some human sharks." She related that a man whom Keabu and Emma had never seen before had come to the estate right after Nancy left. He had said that Mr. Dutton had sent him because he was a dealer in antiques and was willing to buy some of the valuable objects. "But the sums he offered for them were perfectly ridiculous," George reported with a disgusted snort. Bert declared that he was sure the man was not a dealer at all. "I think he was just a snooper, probably one of the double scorps." Nancy was disturbed by the information. Jumping up, she declared, "I've been playing long enough. I must get back to work on the mystery at once." Bess's face broke into a broad grin. "Nancy, while you were gone, Dave and I did some sleuthing," she announced proudly. "Wait until you hear what we found out." End of chapter 14.